With the RTX 5090 now here, there's been a lot of chatter about custom AIB cards, especially as some brands are introducing completely new lineups, including what we have here today in the way of the RTX 5090 ROG ASTRAL from ASUS, a card that had everyone talking when they unveiled it at CES. And for us, we wanted to put it through its paces to see if the sheer size of it can offer anything over the Founders Edition, which as we know has been on a bit of a diet, now coming in as a dual slot card. So today we'll be putting it through its paces. But before we get into that, here's a quick word from this video sponsor.
Alright, stay calm. You've got one job. Do not let this thing overheat.
It's running hot. How do I know if it's safe?
Get the WireView Pro.
The WireView Pro safeguards your graphics card with real-time power and temperature monitoring, acoustic alarms for custom thresholds, and sensor pin detection to ensure proper 12V PWR connection. External sensors can monitor additional components like memory or voltage regulators, while an OLED display provides instant insights, meaning that this is the last time you'll blow a 12V PWR connector, soldier. To keep your system protected, click the link in the description below. So before we jump right in, let me start by saying that this is still an RTX 5090, and we've already taken a look at the Founders card from NVIDIA, so I don't want to stomp over old ground in the sense of showing what a GB202 400 GPU can actually do, because we already know what it's capable of. Though we will look at a smattering of games just to make sure that performance on this card does at least align with where it should based on our Founders results. Beyond that, with custom AIB cards, it's all about design, aesthetics, functionality, extra added features, and most importantly, the cooling performance in terms of fan speed, temperatures, and what that ultimately means for clock speeds, which naturally, being a custom card, comes with a slight overclock when it comes to the boost clock of 2580 MHz, which is 173 MHz faster when compared to NVIDIA's MSRP-based 5090 Founders card, which means that the Astral comes in packing 7% more in terms of clock speed. So it will be interesting to see what that actually means for overall frame rates, and especially when we compare pricing, which I'm going to wait a little bit longer before revealing that. So what is the Astral range of cards all about? What does it offer to the market that we've not already seen? Well, the big obvious one is going to be that it's the first ROG quad fan card, and they've developed it in a kind of really unique way, because while the front looks pretty typical with 3 axial tech fans, this card now includes a full fan on the rear, which ASUS claim that it creates a vertical airflow channel that boosts air pressure by up to 20%, which should lower GPU temperatures and help to minimize hotspots, which in turn will help sustain levels of boost in terms of the clock speed. Now, obviously a lot of this could be marketing bump, and that's where we come in to put it to the test, because, well, what are we here for if not to hold brands to account for what they claim to be and do with their actual products? Now, in addition to the unique fan design, ASUS also claim that the full fan allows them to more densely pack the heatsink fins to increase cooling potential, along with a patented vapor chamber design which allows the heat pipes to sink in without flattening, and in turn help with heat dissipation by up to 10%. Now, speaking of percentages, the ASUS bold claims go even further with their max contact design. They claim another 5% improved thermal efficiency just by using a unique and exclusive manufacturing technique to increase the surface area of the heat spreader, giving us up to 2 degrees cooler temperatures. Though it's always interesting when they make these claims, as, well, we can't actually compare it to the same card without this technology. So we kind of just have to take their word for it. Strange, I know. Now, one area that's actually quite interesting, especially as we work quite closely on occasion with Thermal Grizzly, is the inclusion of a phase change thermal pad. By using a thermal conductor that changes its matter when heated, it not only should provide much better thermal properties, but should also allow for much better contact and longevity, because, well, we've all been there when it's time to replace our thermal paste and you find that you take the cooler off and, well, it just crumbles into pieces. And with GPUs, it's a much trickier task than, say, with a processor. Now, when compared to the FE model from NVIDIA, what's more interesting is how NVIDIA has spent effort shrinking down their PCB, and with ASUS, we've gone back to kind of more of a traditionally sized board. I don't kind of really understand why they've gone with that, but maybe NVIDIA knows something they don't. I mean, they're the ones who manufacture the GPU. So back to the design. This is always going to be an important decision made by anyone looking to spend money on a new graphics card, especially when we're talking about the realms of over $2,000, which is where the RTX 5090 is positioned. It has to look good, be functional, and do what you need it to do. Now, one thing that may be not cause for concern, but something that should definitely be looked into, is the size of the card. NVIDIA with their FE have made a point of it being dual slot and being able to be housed inside smaller form factor cases. If that's what you're looking for, then I'd advise looking elsewhere, as this card comes in at 357mm long, 149mm tall, and 76mm thick, making it a 3.8 slot card. And, well, it has some weight to it as well, which is, I guess, a significant step up from the Founders card. At around 1,800 grams, this is actually coming in at well over 3,000 grams. Also, for some context, the Astral is actually the same length and height as the RTX 4090 Strix, but it packs another 7mm in thickness, making it up to that 3.8 slot compared to now what seems much slimmer 3.5 slot on the Strix. Though, more importantly, is how it compares to the Founders 5090, which, as we know, is a 2-slot card. So quite a big difference. Now, being so big and heavy, it's a good thing that it comes with a graphics card holder, though it is just a simple small holder used to prop the card up. And I do feel that maybe with a card of this caliber, that we as consumers should have maybe got something a little more substantial. Though to play devil's advocate, I guess you could argue that due to the structure of the card and the way that it's made up with its kind of metal framing, doesn't really need it. Now, when it comes to the design, it's definitely a looker, with its industrious but sleek-looking aesthetics and mixed materials that shout premium vibes and sturdy build quality. And that's something we've always expected to see from any ROG product. So, well, the Astral is no different. Now, of course, it has some unique features, including an Aura light bar across the very top, which can be customized to your needs, 2 PWM fan headers for additional cooling, as if 4 fans aren't enough. Though, jokes aside, this could actually be handy if you're chasing for world records, and a dual BIOS switch for those wanting different things from their GPU, such as higher performance by sacrificing noise, or quieter operation for lower performance. These aren't exactly groundbreaking features, but are definitely aspects that you'd expect from a high-end, high-tier end kind of GPU. So, it's a lot of card, and, well, there's a lot going on. And on paper, things look promising. But before we look at how the card performs in terms of cooling, power, and temperatures, we need to make sure that it's performing on par with what we expect from an RTX 5090 based GPU, no matter the brand or the model. To test, we used our GPU test bench with an AMD Ryzen 7 9800X3D and 32GB of Corsair Vengeance RGB 6000MHz CL30 memory on a Gigabyte B650E Aorus Master motherboard. All testing was done on the latest version of Windows with the latest updates and drivers, and due to the nature of the GPU and where it's positioned in the market, we'll be focusing on 4K performance here today. So, with that out of the way, let's get into those glorious benchmarks. Kicking things off with a Plague Tale Requiem, where we see a pretty impressive uplift in performance, with the Astral card performing 8% faster than the Founders Edition. This is actually more like the performance we would have maybe liked to have seen from the Founders Edition card from the get-go, on top of what it already had, as compared to last generation's 4090, we now sit 47% ahead, as opposed to the 36% that we saw going from the 4090 to the 5090 Founders. Moving over to Black Myth Wukong, and we again see some uplift in performance, but by a much smaller margin, now with 4% more performance than the FE. This is enough to increase the gap between the 4090 and 5090 from 32% more performance to 38% more now, which is, I guess, not a massive boost in performance, but anything is welcome. Switching over to Cyberpunk, we only see a small increase yet again, with only 2 frames per second more on average. This isn't the greatest result, as it only works out to be a 2% increase in the frame rate, which isn't all that impressive given that this is going to inevitably be more expensive. So despite this small upgrade in performance, knowing that there's a price premium for 2% more, well, it's a little disappointing. Then, as we move on to Indiana Jones, we don't see much more than what we did in Cyberpunk, as the increase in performance over the Founders is now only 3%, so really not much at all. And with the performance already being triple digits in this title, just a few frames added on really doesn't seem like all that much, and for what we know is more money, it does make you start to question the point a bit, as, well, we're very likely to see this card coming in a lot more expensive. Finally, for rasterization, we have Starfield, where we see a bigger uplift than what we've seen in a few of the other games. But with 8% more performance like we saw in Plague Tale, it's still not all that impressive overall. For an AIB card, an 8% uplift would actually be, well, pretty impressive if the price was there to match. But unfortunately, we know that this is going to be a lot more expensive. And even for a pretty decent uplift of 8%, it's just a little hard to justify, even if the improvement over the 4090 has gone from 11% to 21% when compared to the FE. For the first of our ray tracing tests, we have Black Myth Wukong again, and here we see pretty much the same result that we did in the rasterization test, just with lower frame rates. The Astral only manages to outperform the FE by 4%, which, as I've said already, isn't really enough given that we know this card is a lot more expensive. The jump from the 4090 to this card does increase from 38% to 44%, however, which does make the card sound a little better value than it actually is, but, well, this does only actually translate to 2 frames per second. Then in our final test we ran Cyberpunk, but this time with ray tracing enabled, where we saw actually our worst result yet, not increasing in performance at all, and in fact decreasing in performance by 4%, which is honestly, well, pretty bad. We did run this test multiple times to make sure that it wasn't a fluke of some sort, but upon multiple retests, our performance was consistent, with only fractions of a frame per second difference between each run. So as we look at our hour-long F124 test, we can get a better look at the real-world performance of this cooler. After the prolonged test, we found that the temperatures were kept very much under control, with neither the GPU core or the memory junction temperature going above 67 degrees, all while the fans never exceeded 1700 RPM. It's definitely faster than what we saw on the Founders Edition card, but it wasn't enough to make much more noise, if any at all. And given that the temperatures are significantly lower than the Founders card, which hovered around 72 degrees, it's really nothing to complain about. With such a massive cooler and 4 fans, the GPU staying cool really isn't all that surprising, especially after we saw what NVIDIA were able to do with just 2 slots of card and heatsink. In terms of clock speeds, we saw no change with the memory compared to the Founders Edition card, but we do see about 200 MHz more on the core clock. So not only was the card able to keep cooler than NVIDIA's offering, it was also running more intensely. And we did see this reflected in the gaming performance. Finally, and most importantly for many people, the power draw, and well, it's high, with the average usage sitting at around 570 watts of power, whilst the peaks reached up to a staggering 592 watts in just this test alone, which is a ridiculously high power draw, and is really pushing that 600 watt connector to the limits, though we came into this more than aware of what was actually possible with any 5090 base card. So I don't think we've really seen anything today that's considered out of the ordinary. The RTX 5090 is a beastly GPU as it is, and ASUS's ROG ASTRAL takes what NVIDIA already delivered and pushes it further with some impressive engineering and premium features. However, as with any product aimed at the extreme high end, the question isn't about whether it's better, it's whether it justifies a significant premium that it commands. At $2,799, yeah, the Astral is 40% more expensive than the Founders Edition, which already sets the bar high in terms of price to performance. And yes, before you flock to the comments, I mean for its segment. There's nothing else that comes close if you want bleeding edge, blistering fast performance. For that extra $800, ASUS does deliver better cooling, a slight bump in clock speeds, and more robust build quality, though that could be argued. But the improvements in actual performance don't match the increase in cost. This is a card that feels designed for a specific audience, those who want the absolute best, regardless of practicality or value. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with that, it does limit its appeal to a very niche group of enthusiasts, though if chatter on the internet is anything to go by, well, stock is going to be a bit of an issue anyway. Now, the cooling system is undoubtedly impressive, with the quad fan design and ASUS's use of advanced thermal technologies, ensuring that the card stays cool and quiet under load. Temperatures stayed consistently lower than the Founders Edition during testing, and the fans operated at a good speed without sacrificing performance. This is exactly the kind of innovation that you expect from ROG, and it delivers on the promise of improved thermal performance. However, while the cooling is exceptional, it's hard to argue that it makes a meaningful difference in most gaming scenarios. NVIDIA's dual-slot Founders Edition already manages its thermals extremely well, and unless you're planning on pushing the card to its absolute limits through overclocking or extended heavy workloads, then, well, the Astral's additional cooling headroom just might not be necessary. Size and weight are also factors that just, well, I can't ignore it. The Astral is massive, taking up nearly 4 slots and weighing over 3 kilograms. This makes it one of the largest and heaviest GPUs on the market. And while ASUS include a support bracket, it's a fairly basic solution that just doesn't feel fitting for a card of this caliber. Now, this isn't a GPU you can fit into smaller cases, and even in larger builds, it may require some planning to accommodate its sheer bulk. It's not just about the space that it takes up. The weight could potentially cause sag over time, especially if the support bracket isn't positioned perfectly. Then there's the, well, power draw. At an average of 570 watts with peaks close to 600 watts, this card demands a serious power supply. While high power draw is expected in this tier of GPUs, the Astral really does push its limits. And this could be, I guess, concern for users looking to maintain energy efficiency or avoid upgrading their entire power delivery setup just to accommodate their GPU. Now, at its core, the ROG Astral is all about excess performance, excess cooling, and unfortunately, excess pricing. For enthusiasts who want the best cooling technology, top-tier build quality, and a unique design, the Astral offers a lot. It's a showcase of what ASUS is capable of when they're not constrained by cost or practicality. And in that sense, yeah, it's a success. But for most gamers, the premium price tag is hard to justify. The Founders Edition delivers incredible performance at a much more reasonable price. And even then, it's still expensive. And while it doesn't have the same bells and whistles, I would argue that it's more than enough for the vast majority of users. And even then, we're drilling down into a much smaller niche segment of the market. In the end, the ASUS ROG Astral is an impressive piece of hardware, but it's hard to escape that feeling that it's just too much, too big, too power hungry, and ultimately too expensive for what it offers. It's a card for the few and not for the many. And while it's great to see ASUS push the boundaries of what's possible, the reality is that those boundaries just don't need to be pushed for most people. If you're someone who values practicality, efficiency, or value for money, the Founders Edition remains the smarter choice. But if you're an enthusiast who wants the best and is willing to pay for it, then yeah, the Astral won't disappoint. It just might leave your wallet a little lighter than it should, and definitely lighter than, well, this Astral card. So there we have it, the ROG RTX 5090 Astral from ASUS. A pretty bonkers card with a potentially even more bonkers price tag. But I think we all kind of knew that was going to be the case coming into this. Though I will say that pricing isn't confirmed, but I don't think it'll be too far off in all honesty. So yeah, so on that note, that's a wrap. If you enjoyed this video, then a like and a sub to the channel would be amazing. And if you love what we do, then consider supporting us through the super special Patreon Club. You'll get access to a whole host of goodies, including behind the scenes content, bi-weekly game nights, exclusive access to a lot more of our testing data, and so much more. And it helps us out like you wouldn't believe. The link is, as always, down below. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one. See you later, guys. Bye-bye.